They always say grief keeps to itself. They're wrong. Sometimes it moves in next door. Sometimes it waits by the mailboxes. Sometimes it looks you straight in the eye and asks why you keep running. The first time my neighbor blocked my path and said my name, I realized some ghosts don't stay buried. They learn how to knock. My neighbor stopped me at the mailboxes and said, "Why do you keep avoiding me, Nathan?" And I looked at Melissa Harper, the woman who'd moved in 6 months, earlier with cardboard boxes full of grief and a smile she'd forgotten how to use. And I told her the truth I'd been running from. Because looking at you hurts. I'm Nathan Cross, a paramedic who spent 12 years saving lives in this small Virginia town, and I've been avoiding my neighbor every single day since the moving truck pulled up next door. Every morning when she steps onto her porch, I step inside. Every time she waves across the fence line, I suddenly find urgent reasons to check my truck. Every time she tries to say hello at the grocery store, I remember something I desperately need from a different aisle. For 6 months, I perfected the art of disappearing the moment Melissa appeared. But that morning, she'd had enough. She cornered me between the mailboxes and the hedge, where I couldn't escape without physically pushing past her, and she demanded to know why her neighbor, a man she'd never done anything to, a man she'd tried so hard to be friendly with, kept treating her like she carried some kind of contagious disease. Looking at you hurts, I said again, because she was staring at me with those green eyes that were too much like another pair of green eyes. I'd watched Close 3 years ago, and I couldn't think of any lie big enough to cover the truth. Melissa's face drained of color. Her hand, raised to point an accusing finger, slowly dropped. What does that mean? Her voice came out small, wounded, like I'd just confirmed every fear she'd been carrying. What did I do to you? Why does looking at your neighbor hurt? I stood there, mail clutched in white-knuckled hands, trying to find words that wouldn't shatter both our worlds. But how do you tell a woman that looking at her means seeing the 8-year-old daughter who died in your arms? That avoiding her is the only way you can breathe without drowning in guilt? That you know her name, her address, her birthday, her favorite coffee order, and the exact sound of her scream in a hospital waiting room? Not because you're her neighbor, but because you're the paramedic who failed to save the only thing she ever loved. How do you tell your neighbor that looking at her hurts? Because she's living proof of your worst failure, that every time you see her smile, you remember her daughter asking you to tell mommy she loved her, that avoiding her is penance for the life you couldn't save. And how do you tell her the part? That makes it even worse, that somewhere, in these 6 months of avoidance, of watching her, from windows and listening to her cry through shared walls, you'd done the unforgivable and started falling in love with the woman whose life you'd helped break. Melissa was still standing there waiting for an answer, and I could see the exact moment she decided she wasn't going anywhere until I explained why her neighbor found looking at her so painful. "Tell me," she said, and her voice carried something I didn't expect. Not anger, not hurt, but something like recognition. Like maybe she already knew part of the answer and was just waiting for me to catch up. "Tell me why looking at me hurts, Nathan." "Because I've been avoiding something too, and maybe it's time we both stopped running." She'd been avoiding something? What did my neighbor know that I didn't? And why did the way she said my name sound less like a stranger and more like someone who'd heard it before in a context I couldn't place? The October wind picked up, scattering leaves across the sidewalk between us. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Normal. Sounds in a normal neighborhood where, too, people stood frozen in a moment about to change everything. You really want to know? My voice came out rougher than I meant. You really want to know why I can't look at you without feeling like I'm drowning? Yes. She didn't hesitate. Didn't step back, just stood there in her faded jeans and oversized sweater that looked like it belonged to someone else, someone bigger, maybe someone who wasn't here anymore. I've spent 6 months thinking I did something wrong, thinking maybe I'm too broken, too sad, too much of a reminder that bad things happen to good people. I need to know if I'm right or if there's something else. The mail in my hands. Crumpled, bills and advertisements. Meaningless paper that suddenly felt heavy as concrete. 3 years ago, I started, then stopped, tried again. 3 years ago, on a Tuesday night in the rain, I responded to a car. Accident on Highway 29, a drunk driver crossed the center line. Head-on collision. 3 victims. I watched her face, waited for the moment recognition would hit, but she just stood there listening. I realized she wanted all of it, needed all of it. There was a little girl in the back seat, 8 years old, brown curls, green eyes, pink backpack with unicorns on it. My throat closed. 3 years later, I still couldn't say Lily Harper's name without feeling like someone was crushing my chest. She was conscious when I got there, scared, crying for her mom. I held her while the fire department cut her out of the car. I told her she was going to be okay. Told her everything would be fine. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. But it wasn't fine, I said. She coded in the ambulance. I did everything right. Perfect compressions. Perfect rhythm, everything by the book. But sometimes the book isn't enough. I looked at Melissa now. Really looked at her and let her see everything I'd been hiding for 6 months. She died holding my hand. And before she did, she asked me to tell her mommy that she loved her. Asked me to make sure her mommy knew she wasn't scared at the end. Asked me to promise. A sound escaped Melissa, small, shattered, carrying 3 years of grief in one breath. So I went to the hospital. I continued, shaking now, the mail slipping from my hands to scatter across the sidewalk. I waited until they let me into the family room and I saw you. I saw you collapse when the doctor said the words. Saw you scream your daughter's name like if you were loud enough she'd come back. Saw security hold you back from running toward the morgue. I stood there in my bloody uniform and I wanted to tell you what she said. Wanted to keep my promise. But the words wouldn't come because I knew telling you she loved you wouldn't fix anything. Wouldn't bring her back. Wouldn't stop you from dying inside the way. I watched you die that night. Tears streamed down. Melissa's face, but she didn't run, didn't turn away. She stood there taking every word like blows she'd been bracing for. I'm the paramedic who held your daughter while she died, I said. I'm the one who couldn't save her. I'm the reason you buried an 8-year-old in a cemetery plot that shouldn't exist. My voice broke. So when you moved in 6 months ago, when I saw you step out of that car and recognized you instantly, I knew I couldn't be your neighbor, couldn't be your friend, couldn't look at you without seeing her, without remembering that I failed the person you loved. Most. The silence that followed felt like falling, like the moment before. Impact when you know the crash is coming, but you're still hoping you'll somehow fly. And looking at you hurts, I finished, barely a whisper. Because every time I see your face, I see hers. Every time you smile, I remember her smile. Every time you're in pain, I know I'm part of the reason. Looking at you hurts because you're living proof that I'm not the hero in the ambulance. I'm just a man who watched someone's whole world and couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Melissa wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. When she looked up, her eyes held something. I couldn't read, something like relief mixed with pain, mixed with something else entirely. Nathan, she said, and the way she said my name made my heart stutter. I know who you are. The world tilted. What? I know who you are, she repeated. And now I could hear it, the recognition, the certainty. I've known since before I moved here. I've known for 3 years. The words hung between us like smoke from a fire. I couldn't see but could suddenly smell, burning everything down. You knew! My voice sounded distant, unreal. You knew who I was and you moved in next door anyway? Melissa nodded, fresh tears spilling. Different from before, these carried relief and shame and something that made her look smaller, more fragile. I didn't plan it at first, she said. The house went up for sale, and I needed to leave a place that still had Lily's room, Lily's toys, Lily's height marks on the wall. My realtor showed me 3 houses. Yours was next door to the 3rd. I saw your name on the mailbox. The October air felt suddenly too cold. I went home and pulled out the accident report, the one I'd read 1,000 times looking for something I'd missed, and there it was. Paramedic Nathan Cross. She pressed her hand to her chest. I'd read your name so many times it stopped looking like a name. Seeing it on that mailbox made you real. I couldn't breathe. So I bought the house, she said. Not to hurt you, not to force you to face me. I bought it because I needed to understand. I'd spent 3 years hating the drunk driver. Angry at God, at the universe, at everyone who got to keep their children. But I'd never been angry at you. Why not? The question tore out of me. You should hate me. Because you held her, Melissa said, steady now. because she didn't die alone on a highway in the rain. I read your report. You said she wasn't scared. Do you know what that meant to me? She stepped closer, and the world narrowed to the space between us. So I moved in next door because I wanted to see the man who held my daughter. And I didn't expect you to disappear every time. I looked at you. Her laugh was broken. And I didn't expect to start caring about my neighbor. My heart pounded. I've been avoiding telling you the truth, she whispered. Because somewhere in these 6 months, I stopped trying to understand the paramedic and started falling for the man next door. The air felt charged, dangerous, like we were standing at the edge of something that could ruin us or save us. So you found answers, I said. And instead you found someone just as broken, she finished. Someone who understands what it means to carry guilt. I shook my head. I still see her when I look at you. I know, Melissa said softly. And I still see the man who held her when I look at you. She paused. Maybe that's not a bad thing. I opened my mouth to respond, and that was when a car door slammed behind us, cutting through the moment like a gunshot. The car door slammed again, louder this time, sharp enough to snap both of us out of the fragile stillness we'd been standing in. We turned together instinctively, the way people do when they sense something stepping into their space that doesn't belong. Across the street, a silver sedan idled at the curb, engine still running. A man stepped out slowly, deliberately, like he wanted to be seen. Expensive suit, polished shoes that didn't belong on our cracked sidewalk, cold eyes that scanned the scene the way predators assess distance and weakness. Something in the way he moved made every instinct I had left from 12 years on an ambulance scream that trouble had arrived. He walked toward us with a smile that never reached his eyes. Melissa Harper, he said, voice smooth, practiced. We need to talk about your daughter's accident. The words hit like a punch. I felt Melissa stiffen beside me, her fingers curling around my arm so tight it hurt. Her body went rigid, breath shallow like she was bracing for impact. The man stopped a few feet away and pulled out a badge, flashing it with a casual authority that said he'd done this 1,000 times. Detective Warren Price, he continued. I've been trying to reach you for a while. I stepped, half a pace in front of Melissa. Without thinking, muscle memory kicking in, that old paramedic instinct, to put myself between danger and someone who couldn't take another hit. This is a private conversation, I said, keeping my voice level. Whatever you need can wait, his smile sharpened. Actually, it can't. He tilted the badge just enough for me to read it, then lowered it again. Mrs. Harper, the drunk driver responsible for your daughter's death is up for parole next month. Victims' families have the right to submit a statement. The district attorney's office has been trying to reach you for 6 weeks. Certified letters, phone calls, visits to your previous address. Melissa swallowed hard. I don't want to make a statement, she said, voice hollow. I don't want to sit in a room and relive my daughter's death so a parole board can ignore it and let him walk free anyway. I understand, Price said, tone softening just enough to feel calculated. But there's another reason I'm here. The air shifted. I felt it before he said the words, the way you feel pressure change before a storm. The DA is also reviewing the emergency response to the accident. Price continued. There have been questions raised about protocol, about whether different medical decisions could have led to a different outcome. My blood went ice cold. You're investigating me, I said flatly. Price's gaze slid to me like a blade. Nathan Cross, yes, a complaint has been filed by the defense claiming medical negligence contributed to the fatality. Melissa's hand slipped from my arm as she took a step away from me. And for one terrible second, every fear I'd carried for 3 years came roaring back. This was it. This was the moment. She looked at me and saw the villain I'd always believed myself to be. But when she turned, it wasn't horror in her eyes. It was fury. Medical negligence? Her voice cracked like a whip. Are you seriously standing on my street telling me that some lawyer is trying to blame the paramedic who held my dying daughter instead of the drunk who crossed the center line? Price shifted, uncomfortable now. Mrs. Harper, I'm just here to— No, she cut him off, stepping forward, grief sharpening into something fierce. You're here because the system needs a scapegoat. You're here because it's easier to point at the man who tried to save Her than the man who killed her. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice never wavered. Did your investigation mention that Nathan Cross sits in his truck every night because he can't bring himself to go inside? Did it mention that he spent 3 years blaming himself for something he didn't cause? Did it mention that my daughter's last moments weren't alone and terrified because someone cared enough to hold her? Price looked away. My daughter asked him to tell me she loved me, Melissa said. He gave me the only peace I've had since that night. So if you're looking for someone to blame, look at the drunk driver. Look at the bar that overserved him. Look at every person who watched him get behind the wheel. But don't you dare look at the man who ran toward my child when everyone else ran away. Silence fell heavy and sacred. Price cleared his throat. I'll make sure your statement is included, he said quietly. And I'll inform the DA you'll need more time. Regarding the parole hearing, tell them I'll be there, Melissa said. Tell them I'll speak. And tell them the paramedic saved what he could. Price nodded once, retreated to his car, and drove away. The sound of the engine faded, leaving us standing there in the aftermath, mail scattered at our feet, October wind rustling leaves like whispers. You didn't have to do that, I said, voice hoarse. Yes, I did, Melissa replied, because I'm done watching you punish yourself. She stepped closer, eyes locking onto mine. You didn't kill my daughter. You tried to save her. There's a difference. I shook my head. I still see her when I look at you. I know, she said softly. And I still see the man who held her when I look at you. She placed her hand over my heart, felt it racing. Maybe that connection isn't something to run from. My throat closed. Are we allowed? I whispered. I don't know, she answered honestly. But I know love still exists. I know my daughter didn't die alone, and maybe that's permission enough. I pulled her into a hug, and she came willingly, holding on like she'd been waiting 3 years for someone to steady her. And for the first time in a long time, the weight I carried felt shared. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. 3 months later, we sat in a courtroom while Melissa told a parole board about a little girl who loved unicorns and wanted to be a veterinarian, about a hole in her life that would never close. The parole was denied. 6 months after that, I told her every detail I remembered about Lily's last moments, and she listened like those memories were sacred. A year after the mailboxes, she told me it didn't hurt as much anymore to look at me. 2 years later, we were still learning how to carry grief together. Some days were heavy. Some days were light. But every day we chose to look, to feel, to heal. And I learned something I never expected. That sometimes the thing you avoid because it hurts is the very thing that teaches you how to live again after. The detective drove away. Neither of us moved. We stood there on the sidewalk between our houses. The mail still scattered at our feet, the October wind tugging at Melissa's sweater like it was trying to pull her back into the past. I could feel her breathing against my chest, uneven but real. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't pull away from the feeling. I let it stay. I let it hurt. When we finally stepped apart, it wasn't because we wanted distance. It was because we both needed air. I don't know what happens now, I said, the truth sitting heavy on my tongue. Me neither, Melissa replied. But I know I don't want to keep pretending you don't exist. That was how it started. Not with promises or dramatic declarations, but with 2 people agreeing to stop disappearing. The next morning when she stepped onto her porch, I didn't step inside. I stayed where I was, coffee cooling in my hands, heart hammering like I was back on a call. She waved, tentative. I waved back. It felt ridiculous how hard it was. Later that week, she knocked on my door. I almost didn't answer out of habit, then caught myself and laughed quietly at how much power fear had been given. We sat on opposite ends of the couch like teenagers pretending they weren't nervous. We talked about neutral things at first: weather, work, the terrible state of the road by the grocery store, until the silence shifted and the truth pressed in. Do you think about her every day? She asked. Every hour, I admitted. She nodded. Me too. There was comfort in that. In not having to pretend the grief had an off switch. Some days were easier than others. Some days I'd see Lily everywhere, in the way. Melissa tilted her head when she listened, in the curl of her smile. On those days I told her I needed space. and she gave it without taking it personally. Other days, the memories felt quieter, like they were watching from a distance. And those were the days we sat together longer, shared meals, talked about nothing and everything. She told me stories about Lily I'd never known. The way she hated peas, the way she named every stuffed animal, the way she used to insist on saying goodnight to the moon. I told her about the call details I'd carried alone for 3 years, the rain, the smell of gasoline, the sound of Lily's voice. We cried. We laughed sometimes, too, and that laughter scared us both until we realized it didn't mean forgetting. It meant surviving. Weeks passed, then months. The parole hearing loomed like a storm on the horizon. Melissa pretended it didn't bother her, but I could tell when the nightmares returned. On those nights, she'd sit on her porch long after midnight, staring at nothing. I joined her without asking. We didn't always talk. Sometimes just sitting there together was enough. The investigation into the call moved slowly, bureaucratic and exhausting. I gave statements, relived the worst night of my career in sterile rooms under fluorescent lights. Every time I left, Melissa was waiting. Sometimes in my driveway, sometimes just a text asking if I was okay. No one had ever done that for me before. The day of the parole, hearing arrived cold and gray. Melissa dressed carefully like armor mattered. I sat behind her in the courtroom, hands clenched, listening as she spoke about Lily with a strength that took my breath away. When the decision came down, parole denied, I didn't cheer. Neither did she. We just closed our eyes and breathed, like we'd been holding it in for years. Life didn't magically become lighter after that. Grief doesn't work that way, but something shifted. We started planning small things, a weekend drive, a dinner out. The first time I reached for her hand in public, my chest tightened with fear, but she squeezed back, grounding me. Months later, on a quiet evening, she asked me to tell her everything about Lily's last moments, all of it. We sat on my porch as the sun dipped low, and I spoke until my voice gave out. She listened like those words were precious, like they filled a missing space in her life. When I finished, she cried, then smiled through tears. "Thank you," she said. "Now I can stop wondering." A year passed. One afternoon over coffee, she looked at me and said, "It doesn't hurt as much anymore." I knew exactly what she meant. Loving her didn't erase the pain, but it changed its shape. It became something we could carry together. Some days it still ached sharply. Other days it was a dull reminder of how far we'd come. And every day we chose to keep looking at each other, even when it hurt, because we'd learned that avoiding pain meant avoiding life. 2 years. After the morning at the mailboxes, I woke up beside Melissa to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. For a split second, panic rose in my chest, the old reflex dragging me back to flashing lights and wet asphalt. Then I felt her hand find mine in the dark, fingers warm and solid, and the panic eased. "It's just rain," she murmured, half asleep. Like she'd learned to read my thoughts, and it was just rain. Not every storm meant disaster anymore. We learned that together. Our life didn't transform into something easy or light. Grief didn't pack its bags and move out. It settled into the corners, became part of the furniture. Some mornings, Melissa woke up hollowed out by missing Lily so badly it felt like her chest might collapse in on itself. On those days, I made coffee and didn't try to fix anything. I just stayed. Some nights, I woke up from dreams where I was back in the ambulance. Lily's small hand limp in mine, monitors screaming. On those nights, Melissa held me until my breathing slowed, whispered stories about Lily until the images loosened their grip. We learned there was no finish line for healing, no moment where you woke up and the pain was gone. Healing was choosing every day not to run, choosing to look at each other even when the reflection hurt. Friends didn't always understand us. Some thought it was strange, even wrong, that we'd found each other this way. We stopped trying to explain. What we knew was simple and impossibly complicated at the same time. We both carried the same night inside us, and somehow that made the weight easier to bear. Melissa testified again a year later, when the drunk driver tried for parole a second time. She spoke with quiet fury, not just for Lily, but for every family like ours. When she walked out of the courtroom shaking, I was there, always there. The investigation into my actions was eventually closed. No wrongdoing, no negligence. The letter came in a plain envelope that should have felt like freedom. Instead, I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the words, realizing how little external judgment mattered compared to the one I'd carried inside. Melissa read the letter. folded it carefully, and said, "Maybe now you can forgive yourself." I didn't answer then. Forgiveness felt too big, too final. But slowly, in small moments, I stopped punishing myself. I stopped sitting in the truck all night. I started believing I deserved to be alive. One evening, sitting on her porch as the sun sank low, Melissa said, "When I look at you now, it doesn't hurt the same way." I waited, heart in my throat. "I still see the man who held Lily," she continued. "But I see more than that. I see Nathan. Just Nathan." I took her hand, the way I'd learned to do when words weren't enough. "Looking at you still hurts sometimes," I admitted. "But it's a different kind of hurt." She smiled softly. "The kind that means you're healing." We never pretended Lily wasn't part of us. Her picture stayed on the mantle. Her birthday was still marked on the calendar. Some days we talked about her openly. Other days we carried her quietly. Love after loss wasn't about replacing anything. It was about learning that hearts can stretch, that pain and joy can exist in the same breath. Standing at the same mailboxes years later, I sometimes think about the man I was that morning, cornered, terrified, convinced that pain was something to hide from. I think about how close I came to missing the one person who understood my grief better than anyone else ever could. Looking at Melissa doesn't hurt the way it used to. Now it feels like proof. Proof that even after the worst night of your life, you can still choose to live. You can still choose to love. You can still choose to look at what hurts and let it change you instead of breaking you. We're not perfect. We never will be. We're two people shaped by loss who decided to heal together instead of alone. And every day we choose each other. We choose to look. We choose to feel. We choose to believe that sometimes the thing you avoid because it hurts is the very thing that teaches you how to live again.